Most women spend years bleeding explanations. They explain why they didn't call back, why they asked for more, why they cried too easily, why they didn't smile enough, why they left, why they stayed. And each explanation becomes a quiet apology for existing too deeply. But what would you think if I told you the most powerful shift in a woman's life begins not with something she says, but with what she no longer needs to explain? You see, when a woman stops explaining, she stops betraying herself for the comfort of others. She stops performing on the altar of politeness and begins living as a sovereign soul. She no longer offers her softness as a justification for her standards. Her no becomes complete. Her silence becomes sacred. Her absence becomes a storm. The world, especially the wounded masculine world, is deeply unsettled by this. Not because she is cruel, not because she is detached, but because she is no longer afraid to be misunderstood. A woman who stops explaining is a woman who has seen the architecture of her own shadow and refused to dilute her essence to fit the fears of others. She has watched herself contort for approval, fawn for affection, and translate her intuition into palatable sentences. And one day, like thunder, she decides, no more. This woman no longer rushes to soothe the discomfort her truth creates. She lets silence do the speaking. She lets her actions render explanations irrelevant. She understands what Jung meant when he said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." The child in her used to plead, "Please understand me." But the woman she is now whispers, "I understand myself." And that is enough. In the realm of attraction, this shift is seismic. For a woman who stops explaining is no longer caught in the loop of proving her worth. She does not seduce through justification. She does not beg for emotional literacy. She is no longer a projection screen for a man's insecurity. She becomes a mirror, and not everyone survives the reflection. To the man still ruled by ego, she is terrifying. Not because she wounds, but because she awakens. Her refusal to explain means he must face the emptiness of his own avoidance. Her standards are no longer up for debate. Her intuition is no longer on trial. She will not sit in court defending her boundaries to someone who fears their own. You watching this, you may feel a stirring, a remembering. Maybe you've spent years softening your words so they would land gently in someone else's fragile mind. Maybe you've whispered your needs as though they were threats. Maybe you've watched love become a courtroom, and you, the defendant. But there comes a day when the inner feminine, wounded and wise, rises and says, "I don't owe you the story of my soul just because it confuses you." That is the day you stop explaining. And it is also the day you begin to individuate, to step beyond the persona you crafted for survival and enter the raw truth of yourself. Jung said that individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, distinct from collective expectations. When a woman stops explaining, she crosses that threshold. No longer animated by the need to be understood, she becomes animated by the need to be whole. It is not arrogance, it is clarity. And clarity is magnetic. This woman walks through the world with a calm that unnerves and a grace that refuses to bow. She smiles less, but feels more. She entertains fewer arguments, but holds deeper presence. Her energy is not scattered in the maintenance of everyone else's perception. She lets people leave. She lets confusion linger. She lets silence speak. And in doing so, she regains what centuries of conditioning tried to steal, her own center. It is here that her power sharpens. Her words carry weight because they are no longer diluted by fear. Her gaze pierces because it is no longer pleading. Her yes is a gift, not a default. Her no is a boundary, not a discussion. And the world shifts around her. Because once a woman stops explaining, the world can no longer control her through misunderstanding. There is a particular quiet that follows a woman's decision to stop explaining. It is not the silence of submission, it is the silence of arrival. This silence is not empty, it is alive, heavy with unspoken truths, sacred with self-respect. And to those who once relied on her to constantly decode her own heart, that silence is thunderous. It forces them to confront what they never had to, that she is not an extension of their comfort, that she is not here to translate her essence into something easily consumable. For most of her life, she was conditioned to believe that love is something you earn by softening, shrinking, justifying. She was told that being too emotional, too much, too sensitive meant she had to prove her value by becoming more palatable. In relationships, in families, in friendships, she became a master of emotional translation. She'd explain why she needed what she needed, as if having needs was a sin that required confession. But in this moment of evolution, when she stops explaining, she reclaims something ancient, her original language. The language of knowing, of feeling, of being. Unapologetically, you can see it in her walk. She moves like she has nothing to prove and everything to protect. You can feel it in her energy. It no longer leaks. It stands, it watches, it listens without rushing to interrupt herself with justification. This is not detachment from love. This is devotion to truth. The woman who stops explaining does not become hard. She becomes clear. And clarity, for those still lost in their own fog, can feel like cruelty, but it is not her job to dim so others can feel warm. It is not her role to make the fire less fire so it doesn't burn those who refuse to learn its heat. She has entered a different phase of power, the quiet, unmoving kind. The kind Marcus Aurelius spoke of, a fortress built within, immune to the whims of praise or blame. Her emotions still flow, but they no longer plead for witnesses. Her mind still feels, but it no longer seeks permission to believe itself. You might wonder, what changes really when a woman stops explaining? Everything. Because she begins to see clearly who is capable of meeting her in her wholeness and who only ever loved her versions, not her. She begins to walk away from conversations that spiral into performance. She leaves rooms that require her to justify her value. She abandons dynamics that mistake emotional labor for affection. To the conscious man, she is gold. A woman rooted in her knowing is not intimidating, she is illuminating. She challenges with presence, not provocation. She doesn't demand love, but evokes it. She doesn't chase, she attracts, not by seduction, but by sovereignty. And in her presence, a man either rises or recoils. There is no middle. This is the beauty of her stillness. It reveals. It reveals who was only attached to her confusion, who only felt safe when she was questioning herself, who mistook her self-doubt for love, who stayed not for connection, but for control. And one by one, these false reflections fall away. The audience she once played for disappears, and she is left standing, alone, yes, but not lonely. Because in place of all that noise is peace. This peace is not soft, it is forged. It comes after fire, after grief, after the ache of being misunderstood one too many times. It is the kind of peace that Epictetus called freedom from externals, a peace born not of detachment, but of self-possession. This woman no longer negotiates her boundaries in the currency of affection. She does not beg to be seen. She sees herself. And the beauty of this vision is that it is not filtered through anyone else's gaze. It is primal, sacred, untamed. She does not explain why she desires, why she dreams, why she chooses solitude over shallow company. She does not explain why she says no, or why she leaves, or why she doesn't return your call. She simply does. And in doing so, she calls you to a deeper level of relating, one not based on performance, but presence, not based on explanation, but embodiment. If you are not ready, you will say she is distant, cold, unreasonable. But if you are ready, you will feel the invitation to meet her where she is, in the stillness, in the clarity, in the fire of her refusal to explain. Some women are born into silence, others are broken into it. But the rarest kind, she chooses it. Not the silence of erasure, but the silence of self-possession. The kind that emerges after she has spent years, perhaps lifetimes, bargaining with her truth. The kind that arrives only after she has peeled back every mask she wore for the comfort of others, only to find her own reflection waiting patiently beneath. This silence is not withdrawal, it is ascension. She is no longer explaining because she is no longer performing. For years, she danced around other people's discomfort. She minimized her anger, dimmed her light, translated her tears into logic so she would not seem irrational. She softened her boundaries so she wouldn't be labeled cold. She offered reasons for her no so it wouldn't sound like rejection. She apologized for being too quiet, too emotional, too intuitive, too much, and still, it was never enough. You, yes you, might recognize this pattern. Maybe you've tried to win love through clarity, believing that if they just understood you, they would finally cherish you. Maybe you thought if you were more patient, more articulate, more emotionally generous, they would finally hold your heart with reverence. But here's the truth. Love that requires your explanation isn't love, it's negotiation. And the soul cannot thrive on a contract. The woman who stops explaining has reached this threshold. She no longer views misunderstanding as her responsibility to mend. She no longer sees herself as a puzzle to be solved. She understands that if someone requires a justification for her intuition, they will never feel safe in her knowing. To a world addicted to certainty, her quiet becomes unnerving. To a man who needs her doubt to feel powerful, her stillness is unbearable. She no longer validates immaturity with elaboration. She no longer offers explanations as emotional anesthesia. She simply watches and chooses. This is where her magnetism deepens. It's not in her appearance, not in her sweetness. It's in her refusal to abandon herself to make others comfortable, in her ability to hold presence without overfunctioning, in her capacity to walk away, not out of spite, but out of clarity. This woman knows the weight of emotional labor, and she has finally stopped carrying what isn't hers. She doesn't parent grown men. She doesn't coach partners into seeing her worth. She does not educate someone on how to cherish her. That era is over. Now she observes, not with judgment, but with discernment. Discernment, that forgotten art of the feminine psyche, the subtle wisdom that feels before it explains, that knows before it proves, that senses danger without evidence and intimacy without words. Jung wrote of the anima, the inner feminine archetype, as a force that mediates the unconscious. And when she stops explaining, this archetype begins to lead. She becomes not only a woman, but an oracle. And this terrifies anyone who would rather love her confusion than her clarity. Because now her boundaries do not waver in the presence of charm. Her forgiveness is no longer unconditional, it is earned. Her love is no longer given to potential, it is reserved for presence. She no longer explains her history to be understood. She watches who is willing to stay long enough to listen without entitlement. There's a danger in this power. The danger that people will say she's changed, that she's too guarded now, too distant, too unbothered. But what they're really saying is, she no longer explains herself in ways that center me. And that is the point. She has remembered that her life is not a performance. Her value is not a debate. Her love is not a currency to be traded for approval. And her voice, even in silence, is thunder. You might meet this woman and feel pulled toward her, like a tide. But understand this, she will not lower herself for you to feel tall. She will not justify why she doesn't want chaos. She will not explain why she doesn't chase. She doesn't need to, because now she doesn't lead with her words. She leads with her energy. This is the woman whose absence teaches louder than her explanations ever did. She has entered a realm beyond performance, where her energy speaks with such precision that words become unnecessary. And for those attuned enough to feel it, her silence is not a void, it's a mirror that reflects the very places you've abandoned in yourself. There was a time she filled that silence with noise, with over-explaining, with apologies for being too deep, too passionate, too wild, too unwilling to be tamed. But now she recognizes the sacredness of what she holds within, and she will not unwrap it for eyes that cannot see or hands that only take. In the mythology of the feminine, this is the rite of passage, the descent into the underworld, the Persephone moment, the death of the pleasing self. It is here that she meets the parts of her that once begged to be chosen, the little girl within her who once needed to be liked, needed to be approved of, needed to explain why she cried when no one else did. But now the woman steps forward, and she chooses herself. No longer desperate to be understood, she becomes committed to being whole. This is individuation in its rawest form, the Jungian path where the self integrates what has been repressed and disowned. She no longer sees rejection as a verdict. She sees it as redirection. She no longer spins her gold into rope just to pull someone else out of their darkness. She allows them to meet their own abyss, or not. It is no longer hers to fix. And with that, she becomes magnetic in a way that terrifies those who have only known love as power and balance. They cannot play the old games with her. They cannot trap her in the endless loop of, prove to me that you're worth it. She no longer participates in emotional auditions. She simply exists, fully, radiantly, and without compromise. There's a fire in her eyes now that wasn't there before. Not the fire of rage, but the fire of embodiment. She has burned away the need to be palatable. She has cremated the role of savior. And in the ashes, she has built a throne carved from her own boundaries, crowned with her own solitude. She's not too much anymore, because she no longer measures herself through shrinking lenses. She's not hard to love, because she no longer accepts love that costs her self-respect. She's not guarded. She's simply not available for what drains her. This is the woman whose gaze you cannot lie to, the one who does not flinch at your silence because she has made peace with her own. She does not beg for closeness. She knows the difference between intimacy and intrusion, and she refuses to mistake attention for affection. She does not explain why she disappears, because if you truly knew her, you'd understand. You might say she's cold, but she isn't. She's warm, with boundaries, tender with teeth, compassionate without self-abandonment. She's the kind of woman who can hold your hand through your darkest night, but only if you are also willing to walk. And if not, she will let you go without anger, without drama. But make no mistake, her goodbye will echo, because the woman who stops explaining becomes unforgettable. She no longer occupies spaces where she has to over-intellectualize her intuition. She no longer writes essays for people who skim. She no longer sits at tables where love is conditional on her compliance. Her silence is not empty space. It is sacred ground. You either meet her there or you move along. The old version of her might have run after you, pleading for closure, drafting long messages in the dark. But the woman she is now does not chase clarity. She becomes it. She walks away not to punish, but to protect. And those who truly see her won't need an explanation. There is a moment, quiet and holy, when the woman who once over-explained finally hears the sound of her own breath again. Not the breath of exhaustion, but the breath of return. Return to her body. Return to her knowing. Return to her wild, undomesticated essence that never needed to be explained in the first place. This is the sacred reclamation of the feminine. Not in being louder, but in being truer. Not in controlling how she is perceived, but in surrendering the need to be perceived at all. She no longer translates her soul into bite-sized justifications for people unwilling to sit in complexity. She no longer performs her truth for applause. She no longer argues with misunderstanding, because she has learned that those committed to misunderstanding her are not the audience she was born for. You, if you are listening with the ears of your deeper self, might feel something shifting. A strange grief, perhaps, for all the times you gave yourself away in pieces, hoping someone would hold them all together. For all the times you filled the silence with nervous words, begging to be interpreted correctly. For the rooms you stayed in far too long, narrating your pain like a map, hoping someone, anyone, would follow it back to your heart, but no more. The woman who stops explaining knows the cost of self-erasure. She has paid it in tears. She has paid it in time. She has paid it in the quiet moments when she realized she was shaping herself into the very thing she once feared becoming. Small, soft-spoken, and tolerable. So now, she lives differently. She speaks less, but what she says is gospel. She gives less, but what she offers is gold. She loves less often, but when she does, it is holy. She no longer confuses explanation with intimacy. She no longer offers her story to those who haven't earned her truth. She no longer breaks herself open so others can feel whole. Her silence is not withholding, it is discernment. It is sacred economy. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now she is. This becoming is not loud, it is not posted, it is not performed for social approval. It is lived, moment by moment, in her choices, in her standards, in her grace, in her absence, in her no, in her enough. Those who crave codependency will call her dangerous. Those who crave reflection will call her divine. She does not explain why she prefers solitude, why she reads in silence, why she disappears for days into her own world. She does not explain why she no longer entertains certain conversations, why she no longer texts back, why she does not make herself available just because someone wants her to be. She simply is, without need for interpretation. And this is the deepest freedom a woman can know. Not freedom from pain, but freedom from the compulsion to dress it up for someone else's comfort. Not freedom from vulnerability, but freedom from proving that her vulnerability deserves safety. The woman who stops explaining has stepped into radical responsibility for her energy. She no longer waits for closure. She gives it to herself. She no longer begs for permission. She grants it. She no longer rehearses her boundaries. She embodies them. Her life becomes a quiet temple. You don't enter it with noise. You don't enter it with ego. You don't enter it trying to fix, change, analyze, or possess. You enter it humbly. You enter it slowly. You enter it with the understanding that nothing here will be handed to you through explanation, only presence. This woman does not need to be understood. She needs to be felt. And if you cannot feel her, you were never meant to hold her. So the next time she falls silent, don't assume she is angry. Assume she has finally remembered who she is. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.